to introduce Dr. Mohammed Ahmedullah. For those of you who don't know him, he's lived in the UK since 1973, when he arrived there as a child from Bangladesh. He completed his early education in Newham, East London, and further education in Hendon, Northwest London, and higher education at the University of Essex and Kent, from the latter gaining a PhD in '98 on the relationship between theory of knowledge and political theory. Most of his career involved working for local councils in central government, inner city regeneration programs during the 1990s up to 2010. Since 2011, he has worked for several non-government organizations, delivering projects on history and community cohesion. He is a founder member of Brick Lane Circle that runs a variety of projects and activities, one of which is the annual Bengal History Week. His work on the Habshi rule of Bengal is based on a 3-month research during late 2020. His personal blog website is www.imbunomad.com, and he can share that on the chat with you, where he also writes a regular blog. So, with that information, I give you Dr. Mohammed Ahmedullah. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm just getting my technology sort of sorted before I start. No, yeah, thank you very much for coming to this presentation tonight. I was actually nervous about tonight because my research on Habshi has only been for 3 months, and I knew hardly anything about it before, about the history of the Ethiopian rule of Bengal. I heard from people occasionally that there has been such a period, when Ethiopians ruled. Hang on, can you see? Is it full screen?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the slideshow is full screen.
No, you can see the slides on the side though. You haven't done the slideshow yet. There you go. Now it's full screen.
Full screen, yeah. Okay. Right. So Habshi period was between 1487 and 94. They ruled like most of Bengal that we know, and some other parts, probably in Bihar. I didn't get a chance to look at, the details of the exact extent of the territory that was under their control. So what I'll be covering in this presentation tonight is just a little bit about how I got started working on this topic and sources of information I found when I was trying to study, understand this period. And I will say a little bit about the city of Gaur, the capital of Bengal Sultanate at that time. Then I will discuss, one by one, the 4 rulers who have been described as Habshi, when they came to power, what circumstances and what they did and how they were kind of overthrown and replaced by someone else. Then I will look at some foreign accounts of the period, just to see what some foreigners said about the Habshi rule. One of the reasons why I wanted to look at some foreign accounts was because some of the sources that we generally use, to study the Habshi period, they say that once the Habshi period ended, the new Sultan, who started the Hussain Shahi dynasty, he actually, expelled, got rid of all the Abyssinians from Bengal. But I just wanted to see if that's true. right? And that's where foreign accounts kind of throw some light, to help us understand a bit more about, what was probably going on. Then I discuss, about slave sultans. I mean, when I heard about, there being, sultans who were slaves, and slaves who became sultans, or slaves actually ruled sultanates. At the beginning, it kind of freaked me out. I couldn't understand how a slave could become rulers, right? Because, growing up in London, in the UK, I was mostly familiar with, the African transatlantic slavery, involving Africa and the Americas. I knew a little bit about the Dutch slavery in the East Indies, but they were kind of different. This, the idea that slaves became sultans kind of freaked me out completely at the beginning. But obviously, when you look into the subject, then you understand the differences in slavery in different places in different times. So that was very interesting for me. And then at the end, I will raise some issues, to do with how, the gaps in terms of the gaps of our understanding, as far as I can see, and the need, and how we might be able to develop a better understanding of the period. It all started, my interest going, kind of on the topic. Some kind of starting point was a few years ago, although I didn't take up the study, but I was put in a place where it kind of later on prompted me, to go and study this subject. There's a Somali artist in East London. Her name is Kinsey Abdullah. So one day I was at the Rich Mix Center attending an event. And when I was coming out, I saw Kinsey and we got talking. And Black History Month was mentioned. So I talked about, slavery. And then she quickly, kind of reacted negatively and became a bit angry and said that why, do we always have to talk about Black people and slavery? What about positive aspects of Black people's history? Now, my reason for bringing up slavery was not to discuss, slavery as normally people talk about, but I thought I discovered a possible link, between Bengal textiles and transatlantic slavery. But obviously, she was not in a mind to listen to me because she was fed up. People always talking about slavery when it comes to Black people. And she asked me whether I knew there were great African rulers of Bengal, and that I should learn more about them and talk about them. I heard before from reading history about 20, 30 years ago that there were some Ethiopian origin rulers of Bengal, but I didn't know any details. But I remember reading that was only for a very small period, for 3 or 4 years, and it didn't seem very significant for me. But what happened last year, we were trying to develop a project called Bangladesh 500. Bangladesh 50 years of Bangladesh independence. And so we thought, why don't we do a project, try and learn, encourage people to research and look at history going back 500 years. Then I thought, 500 years kind of starts with the rule by Hussein Shahi dynasty. But then I thought, why don't I look back a little bit before, just to see how 500 years arrived, Then obviously the Habshi rule, came into my focus. Then I thought, I should go and really look at this before we can look at what happened during the last 500 years. Because also last 500 years was a kind of a break with the past. Because it was during that time, the Europeans also started to come to Asia, with the Portuguese, and in Bengal, early 1500, 1517 officially. So I thought, because, from 1500, it was kind of a new period. If you look back, then later on, the British, the Dutch, and other Europeans came. The Mughals established themselves end of 1500s, and so they became a kind of different dynamics. So that's how I got into, and it was late last year, probably around September, that I started to try and undertake some studies, but couldn't find much materials, resources, especially with the pandemic, British Library being kind of closed and bookshops are now open. So I had to buy a lot of books through Amazon and undertake internet searches. Just a summary. Well, just to set the context, right, before I go into the subject. Now, Habshi rule was from 1487 to 1494, about 7 years, under 7 years actually. But before that, that rule was preceded by what is called restored Ilyas Shahi rule, and then it was followed by what is called Hussein Shahi rule. Actually, it was Hussein Shahi, Hussein Shah, who actually brought to an end to the Habshi rule, and he was the prime minister of the last Habshi ruler of Bengal. Now, Bengal had a total of 4 Ethiopian or Habshi sultans. Some people have described that as Habshi dynasty, but that's a wrong term because no dynasty was established. Now, 3 of the 4 sultans, Habshi sultans, they became sultans by murdering or killing the previous sultan. And each of the rulers was a different, unrelated individual. So one, there was no relationship, no son and nothing. So there was no like a family, or relative-based dynasty. Now, one possible exception could have been the 3rd Sultan might have been the son of the 2nd Sultan. Might have been, but not 100% kind of, we cannot say this by with 100% confidence. And also the 3rd Sultan might not have been the son, might have not been Habshi. And because historical sources, the main 2 sources that talks about this period, they actually say one say that the 3rd Sultan was the son of the 2nd Sultan, and the other one says the 3rd Sultan was actually the son of a Turkic Sultan from the Ilyas Shahi dynasty who was murdered by the 1st Habshi Sultan. Now, historians, have written much about the Ilyas Shahis, Hussein Shahis, but hardly anything on the Habshi rule. I don't know what the reasons are, but I think thinking about it is something very important. We need to understand. When I advertised this seminar on Facebook, someone commented by saying that, oh, it all makes sense now. My grandfather looks a little bit like Ethiopian, now it all makes sense. So, there is so much things we don't know about history. And, studying Habshi period might help us understand many other things about us. Just want to say something else. The Ethiopians and Habshis coming to Bengal was not kind of new, although the sources say that, during the 1460s, Ilyas Shahi Sultan, 2nd Ilyas Shahi, 2nd restored Ilyas Shahi Sultan, Rukunuddin Barbosa brought in about 8,000 Habshi soldiers, to Bengal. But there have been, Habshis in Ethiopians, Abyssinians in Bengal before. as was in Delhi, close associate of Sultan Jalaluddin Razia. This particular Abyssinian, who was in Bengal in early 1400, he was sent to Makkah by Sultan Ghiyasuddin Muzaffar Shah, who was the third Ilyas Shahi, is it third? Yeah, Ilyas Shahi, first Ilyas Shahi ruler. And he apparently sent all this gold to Mecca and Medina to have madrasas built and buying some land, create endowment, and undertake some repairs to facilities there. And some of the places I read was that this gold was part of his zakat. I don't know if this is true, but this is what I read some places. Now, just to go through, a table, so you know the context. So Muslim rule in Delhi, and Bengal started with Bakhtiar Khalji's conquest, in Bengal, 1205, and it was a period of about 22 years. There were Khalji rulers, right? They were not slaves, or they were not brought in as slaves. A lot of the slave sultans, when they became sultan, they were already freed people, many mated. Now, then from 1227, until the grandson of Sultan Balban, he was overthrown. Late, I think it was the late 1200s, around 1300. Bengal was ruled by what they call as Mamluk slaves. They were governors of Delhi. So the governors of Delhi, sultans of Delhi, and they were governors. So sultans of Delhi, they were all ex-slaves. So they sent their slaves as governors. So some of the governors of Bengal, they were slaves, or they were children of freed slaves. And so that period is called Mamluk slave rule. And then from around 1300 until 1487, you had, what they call House of Firoz Shah, then 3 independent principalities. They're very short-lived, covering different time span. And then you had Ilyas Shahi rule, and which was interrupted by what they call as Raja Ganesh and his descendants for about 18 years. And then the later Ilyas Shahis before the Habshi rule. So it started with by someone who's called Kawajasara. He was a eunuch, and then he killed. He called himself Sultan Shehzada Barbosa after killing the previous sultan, and then until the death of Sultan Shamsuddin Muzaffar Shah, we had what is called Habshi rule, and after Habshi rule, it was Hussain Shahi rule. So it's 1494 until 1538. Then you had the Afghan and the Mughals, and obviously then later on the British. Just quickly go through, the sources. The first sources are 2 books. One is called Tariq-i-Firishta. It was written by someone called Muhammad Hindu Kush Firishta. Now he wrote this book at the beginning of 1600, so it's like more than 100 years later. And then Riyazuddin Salatin, a book was written by Ghulam Hussain Salim. He wrote it about 21 years after the British takeover of Bengal. So that's like about 300 years after what happened. So, they're not like eyewitness or account of people, who lived at that time. But these 2 works on the Habshi is near identical, but there are some minor important differences as well. So they are near identical, but obviously they have used other material that were around, which are no longer available, for their book. And then obviously coins and sources are the second. Sorry, coins and inscriptions are the second sources. What coins do? They help determine dates and correct names, and mint towns, and give an indication of the extent of a ruler's territory. But they don't give any details about other things. But sometimes they also give details about conquest and victories because what's contained on the coins. Third sources are foreign accounts by foreigners. I have used three. One is by Ludovico di Bertama. He visited Bengal in 1505. It was the closest, to the Habshi rule. Then you had Tom Perez, who was in Malacca, around, he wrote his account between 1512 and 1515. Then Duarte Barbosa, 1518, from a visit to the area earlier. Then four sources are, the British, when the British took over, some British officials went to the site, of Old Gaur, which was in ruins and covered by forest and dangerous animals. So they started the process of clearing and recording, painting, drawing, and surveying the area. And then the last one from that period was a book called Contribution to the Geography and History of Bengal, Mohammedan period, by Heinrich Blockman. This is an important book because this is the first time, if I am correct, is that he uses the Muslim sources, like Firishta and Salatin and other sources. And then he combines those sources with inscriptions and coins to try and, come up with some precise dates of the rule of each of the different rulers and dynasties. This is one of his map drawings. I couldn't make head and tail of this, so I wouldn't go into this. The Google map actually, if you can just have a look, you can see where it says Chotoshona Mosque, at the bottom, and the red at the top, Boroshona Mosque. Now, Boroshona Mosque is in West Bengal, near Malda, and Chotoshona Mosque is in Bangladesh, the Rajshahi, that sort of. From Henry Creighton, we know that the city that he mapped, he surveyed, he estimated that it was about 19 miles long by about 1.5 miles wide. And Chotoshona Mosque and Boroshona Mosque, they were part of city of Gaur. There are some mosque drawings from Henry Creighton, right? Now, but they were not built by, any of the Habshi rulers. They just to give you an impression, an idea of what Gaur was like. The Gaur Palace no longer stands, and a lot of other buildings, but recent excavations of the areas have been unearthing really important things. I haven't had the chance to have a look at them properly, but brief kind of look at some of the materials generated recently in the last couple of decades. Really kind of interesting. You can still, when you scrap some soil, you can still find beautiful tiles on the floor. Okay, now I'm going to go one by one and talk about the rulers. As I mentioned earlier, the first Habshi Sultan, he named himself after becoming Sultan as Sultan Shahzada Barbaksha, 1487, he came on the throne. But it was within a year, I think it was 6 months or so, before he was overthrown, killed and overthrown. Now, the Sultan that he overthrew, murdered and overthrew, his name was Sultan Jalaluddin Fateh Shah. According to the Riyaz, the one of the book I mentioned, talks about, Jalaluddin Fateh Shah being a popular king, popular sultan, who pursued, a liberal policy toward the subject, and he talks about the gates of happiness and comfort are thrown open to the people of Bengal. So, I'm finding this bit confusing, because if this sultan was popular, then why would a eunuch, somebody who works for the sultan, who is, I think he was head of the guard in the palace, right? Who moved and killed the sultan. But also, so what happened after he killed Sultan Jalaluddin Fateh Shah with the help of pike guards, who used to, about 5,000 or so pike guards used to be always in attendance at the palace, around the palace, to protect the king and so on, with all other duties, which I don't know much details about. But one day it was said that the eunuch, commander of the pike guard, I think that was his position. And the pike guard leagued with him and then helped him kill the sultan. And after that, he collected, because the nobles and higher up people were not interested in kind of being part of him, according to these documents, right? According to the book, that he collected all the eunuchs of the palace and many low station people around him, and gave them benefits. But the chief officers and nobles of the state were against him, and they were planning, to kind of get rid of him. It is also said that he killed a lot of Orthodox kind of oriented religious people and Hindu infidels. Obviously these sources don't explain, so we don't understand, we don't know the context, and we don't know how true all these informations are. But what happened, there was another, highly regarded Abyssinian noble, commander of a group of armed forces, loyal to the previous sultan from the Ilyas Shahi dynasty. He was said to be in the frontiers, doesn't say whether he was engaged in some campaigns or he was just protecting the frontiers. But after he heard that his master, the sultan, was killed, so he planned to come back, to take revenge. But in the meantime, the new Abyssinian sultan, Sultan Shahzada Barbosa, he actually summoned Malik Andel, the Abyssinian commander loyal to the previous sultan, to come to Gore, to come to back to the base. And he planned to actually, have him arrested, and according to one source, kill him, and another source to capture him. But Malik Andel, he kind of guessed, or thought what the Abyssinian sultan, who grabbed power, was planning. He was also Abyssinian himself. So what Malik Andel did, he came back to the city with a large force, and the impression I got is that there were visible support shown by important people, in the city. So the Sultan Shahzada Barbosa, he decided against moving against him so quickly, because he was nervous. He didn't feel confident, but he was also worried about his safety. So what he did, he invited Malik Andel to come, and then demanded or requested that he swore on the Quran that he will not harm him. So Malik Andel, what he did, he he promised not to harm him because he has become the Sultan as long as he's sitting on the throne. As long as he's on the throne. Two sources, they give slightly different account. One source say literally sitting on the throne, another say being on the throne. So it seems the impression that the sources try to create is the Malik Andil, he told the usurping Ethiopian Sultan that he would not harm him while he is literally sitting on the throne, not while he's the Sultan. But the Sultan took it that while he's the Sultan. So this is kind of what happened. But then Malik Andil, he was planning to kill him somehow, avenge his, the killing of his master, Sultan Jalaluddin Fateh Shah. So what happened, one day, while the Ethiopian, the Habshi Sultan, the eunuch Sultan, he was sleeping. The sources say that he drank a lot of alcohol, and then he fell asleep on his throne. And some porters at the palace actually secretly allowed Malik Andil to go inside. And so Malik Andil went inside and wanted to kill him, but he saw the Sultan sleeping on the throne. And because he swore on the Quran that he would not harm him while he's sitting on the throne, so then he didn't act on his plan. But then suddenly the sleeping Sultan fell on the floor. And when he fell on the floor, then Malik Andil went for him. But the funny thing was that a struggle kind of ensued, and the lights went off because the lamp fell under their scuffle. And then the Malik Andil was underneath, and the Sultan, he was stronger, the eunuch Sultan, he was on the top. And so Malik Andil shouted for help. A Turk named Tugrus Khan, he came in with other Abyssinians to help Malik Andil. But then they saw the Sultan, usurping Sultan, on top of Malik Andil. So they kind of hesitated, but there's a direct quotations, which are very strange. You can have a direct quotation where the Malik Andil, the commander, he shouts at Ugris Khan, say, don't worry, this guy is chill. It's not going to go through and harm me. But even if he does, it doesn't matter. I don't mind dying and sacrificing for my master. But anyway, I won't go into too much detail. But that evening, some other things happened, and then the first Ethiopian Sultan was killed by the second Ethiopian who became Sultan, who became the second Sultan. After becoming Sultan, he adopted the name of Sultan Saifuddin Firoz Shah, but he was known as Andil Malik, as I said. And so what happened? Soon after he killed the usurping eunuch Sultan Shehzada Barbak Shah, he called for the prime minister, the vizier, to discuss about installing the young son of the previous Ilyas Shahi Sultan, the last Ilyas Shahi Sultan, to the throne. But when the prime minister came, they sort of, and nobles came, and they sort of decided the child was too young. So in the morning, they went to the Dogar queen, the widow of the Sultan killed by the first Ethiopian Sultan. And when they got there, they wanted to talk about installing her young son. But her young son was only 2 years old. But she told them that she actually promised God that whoever kills the person who murdered her husband, she would make him the Sultan. But Malik Andil, he was not interested. He actually hesitated. But the nobles also thought he would be the right person. So because the nobles was in favor and the Dogar queen, said she actually promised God, then Malik Andil accepted, and so he became the Sultan. Now, during his sultanship, which lasted about under 3 years, we don't hear of much incidents, and we don't hear any plots to kill him or anything like that from the sources. But one of the sources mentioned that he built a mosque, a tower, and a reservoir in the city, in addition to many public works. Now, because of this tower is mentioned, that's why people think, that tower that I have used in the publicity called Firoz Minar, and his name is also Saifuddin Firoz Shah. So people think that was built by him. Now, I have my doubt, because I've seen some sources which talks about that tower, Firoz Tower, Firoz Minar, was actually started in 1485. So 2 years before he became the Sultan. So it's possible it was completed during his time. There's another strange story I found on Wikipedia. Someone wrote that when this tower was completed, Sultan Saifuddin Firoz Shah, he didn't actually like it at all. He was disappointed at some aspects of the tower. So he threw the architect off from the top, which probably is very unlikely given the kind of personality that the history has depicted of the second Ethiopian Sultan of Bengal. Now, he was also known for being very sort of kind and supportive and caring to the poor. And he was seen by others, within the Sultanate officers who looks after money, who execute policies and so on, that he might bankrupt, the treasury because of his too much concern for the poor. So one day he asked the people, his officers, to give 1 lakh rupees to the poor. And the officials, they were worried. So they thought maybe the Sultan doesn't understand or appreciate what 1 lakh is, right? He's being kind of too lavish. So let's kind of show him and help him understand, appreciate the value of money. So they brought 1 lakh rupees in gold, and then they sort of placed in a room, and then they invited the Sultan to come to have a look, so that the Sultan can appreciate. And when the Sultan entered, he asked the people, "Is that all? That's not enough, right? Give the poor 2 lakhs." So history has built up a reputation that this Sultan was a kind man. He cared for the poor, and he was a decent. And whatever he did in a kind of legitimate and upright way. Killing the previous Sultan was a legitimate and positive act. And also the fact that it was said that he swore in the Quran, then he still killed the Sultan. But then the history, the way they use the language, they try to show that he didn't do anything wrong. This particular Sultan, actually, some say he was killed, some say he died of natural disease, natural causes. Now, the third Sultan was called Sultan Kutubuddin Mahmud Shah. He was a child, right? So what happened, when Sultan Saifuddin Firoz Shah was killed or died, a child became the new Sultan. Now, there was a regent to supervise and look after his affairs and him while he was, still underage. That regent was also an Abyssinian. His name was, what's his name? Habash Khan. So he looked after the child. Now, as I said earlier, this particular child Sultan, in what one source say he was the son of the Ethiopian Second Sultan, and another said that he was the son of the last Ilyas Shahi Sultan, who was murdered by the first Habshi Sultan. But if you think about it, still the information is kind of incomplete. The coin of that period may indicate that he was the son of the second Habshi ruler, Saifuddin Firoz Shah. But still there is a problem with that. For example, this Sultan was only 5 years old, sorry, very young. It doesn't say how old. But if he was the son of Sultan Jalaluddin Fateh, then he would have been 5 years old. But there is no information about how old this particular Sultan was in the literature. But the coins say he was the son of Saifuddin Firoz Shah. But it's possible that Saifuddin Firoz Shah took the son of Sultan Fateh Shah, who was his master, treated him like a son, and kind of adopted him as well. And when he died, Habash Khan, and when this child was enthroned, Habash Khan became the prime minister, but the child was too young. So it was Habash Khan who was doing taking all the steps, doing all the things on behalf of the Sultan. It's possible it was Habash Khan who got on the coin printed that he was the son of Sultan Saifuddin Firoz Shah, the second Ethiopian ruler of Bengal. But what happened was the child was too young, very young, so he wasn't obviously doing anything, couldn't do anything. Habash Khan, it said, was becoming very kind of influential and powerful. He was the administrative general of finance and administration, administrative affairs. And what this did was to make another important Habshi officer within the court very jealous. His name was Sidi Badr Diwana, right? And so what happened, one day, he moved against Habash Khan. He killed him, then he killed the child, right? Then he, established himself as the ruler, as the Sultan of Bengal. So he was the fourth Sultan, who killed the child Sultan and the prime minister. So Sultan Samsuddin Muzaffar Shah, he was the fourth and the last Habshi Ethiopian Sultan of Bengal. And his rule was from 1491 to 94, just over 2 years, under 3 years. So he became ruler after killing Sultan Qutbuddin Mahmud Shah and his prime minister Habash Khan. Now, the history is very harsh on this person, this new Sultan, the fourth Ethiopian Sultan. Again, he is said to have killed many learned and pious nobility of the city, and also killed infidel Rajas who were opposed to the sovereigns of Bengal. He was also said to be a bloodthirsty, short-sighted, cruel, and unwise. In addition to killing, some infidel Rajas and many pious people, he cut the pay of soldiers, right? And in order to increase the treasury, and he committed oppression on people to collect more taxes. Now, these are all, historical accounts written hundreds of years after the episode ended. So we don't know how much reliance and we can have on them, right? But what happened is that he appointed a prime minister called Said Hussein Sharif, who was from an Arab descent. But I believe he was born in Bengal, if I'm correct, right? I have to check that, but he was from an Arab descent. And so some records says that he actually badly advised, the Ethiopian Sultan, Shamsuddin Muzaffar Shah, in order to make him unpopular so that he can move against him and take the throne. But anyway, what happened was that he got into league, with people who develop, who turned against the fourth Ethiopian Sultan, and even army commander, because he cut the pay of some soldiers, and then some units got disbanded, and the army commanders, who were running those forces, they left. So they became part of the disgruntled group, who wanted to remove Sultan Shamsuddin Muzaffar Shah. Okay, so he, day by day, from the sources, we learned that he became more and more unpopular. And then, there were plots being hatched against him. So what happened one day, the rebels, right, they moved against him, and he barricaded himself with 5,000 Abyssinian and 30,000 Afghan and Bengali forces. I mean, if this is true, right, then you can see even the last Abyssinian ruler, who was said to be cruel, he still had a lot of non-Abyssinian supporters, under him. And there were fights. They were using arrows and swords, sorties, and so on. And one source say lasted 4 days, another say 4 months. And the source also talk about, when people were captured from the other side, then they were brought to Sultan, Muzaffar Shah, the last Ethiopian ruler, and he killed them himself. It is said that he killed 4,000 people by his own hand. And the total death from this 4 months or 4 days of fighting was about 120,000. According to Firishta, right, Firishta's work, the end of the battle came when the prime minister gained the confidence of the palace pikes. Again, the pike seems to have played a very important kind of role. From what I learned from reading, the pikes were Hindu foot soldiers, who were brought in to guard the palace. So if this is true, so they helped with killing the first Sultan by the Abyssinian and the third, the last one. So anyway, so after that, the Sayyid Hussein Sharif, he entered the palace with others. He killed the fourth Ethiopian ruler, and many other people were put to death, associated with the last Ethiopian ruler, and he enthroned himself as the new Sultan. But what something very strange happened, according to the sources, is that after he established himself as the Sultan, but during the process, he needed kind of permission or support or kind of vote, consent from the nobles. So, and there is direct quote, what happened. So it is said the noble said to him, sorry, the nobility, nobles of the court said to him, if we elect you, in what way you will conduct yourself towards us? He answered that I will meet all your wishes, and immediately I will allow you to whatever may be found overground in the city, while all is underground will appropriate to myself. What that did, that led to several days of total mayhem, right? Pillaging of the city. People were just taking everything. But then this was very strange. But then after a few days, the new Sultan gave order for people to stop. And then he killed 12,000 people himself to stop people from pillaging the city, even though he gave them permission to start doing it in the first place. Now, just before I move on, the last Ethiopian Sultan, he ruled for more than 2 years. So he obviously had some support from non-Ethiopians as well, because most of the soldiers and nobility wouldn't have been Ethiopians. They would have been, Turkic, Afghan, Arab, and the local Hindus. But then, so he must have had, quite a bit of loyalty, because he also led, according to some in a coin, evidence in the coin, military expeditions, and even achieved some conquest, some victories on the battlefield and extended territories, even though it wasn't very much, right? But he did manage to extend some Bengal territories. And after the new Sultan took over, the Hussein Shah dynasty started. And it is said that Hussein Shah expelled all the Abyssinians from his entire domain. And even Jaunpur, next door to Bengal, they even didn't want them. So then they had to go back to Gujarat and the Deccan. But was that really true, right? That all the Abyssinians were actually expelled. That's why I wanted to look at some foreign account and some other kind of evidence. If you look at the account of Varthama, Ludovico Varthama, who went to Bengal, around 1505, and he talked about the economy. He said many things, about the cultures, the attires of the people, what the city was like, how big it was, how it was designed, planned, and so on. And he believed that the capital city of Bengal was the best place in the world, and that is for living, right? He said nothing about the Abyssinians in the city at that time, but he provided details of Armenian Christians that he met. He does not name any other group or inhabitants of God, except to say that the Sultan of the country was a Moor who maintains 200,000 men for battle on foot and on horse, and they're all Muhammadans. 50 ships are laden each year in this place with cotton and silk, which stuffs are this, that is to say, Bairam, Namoni, Lizati, Sianjor, Dozar, and Sinabab. These same stuff go through all Turkey, through Syria, through Persia, through Arabia, through Ethiopia, and through all India. So he mentions exports from Bengal going to Ethiopia. So there was traffic between Bengal and Ethiopia. Now, this does not necessarily indicate that Ethiopians were still in Bengal, but there's a possibility, that Ethiopians there were Ethiopians in Bengal that time. Duarte Barbosa, right? Now, in his book, which was published in 1518, from accounts written a few years earlier, he never visited Bengal, but he provides very interesting information. His accounts are based on what he heard from others and include details about the people of Bengal, again, like Varthama, attires and economy and so on. But he mentioned Abyssinians in the list of people as examples of strangers from many lands, such as Arabs, Persian, and Habshis, who live in Bengal. However, he does not discuss any detail about the Abyssinians in Bengal. As I said, he didn't visit Bengal, but he wrote this from his reports. He might have received those reports in the early 1510s, sometime around that time. The last foreign account I want to look at is by Tom Perez, in the Summa Oriental. Now, he wrote this book between 1512 and 1515. Now, he wrote this while he was in Malacca. Now, those of you who know, the Portuguese captured Malacca in 1515 from the Sultan of Malacca. And then Portuguese, immediately went to the Spice Islands, the Bandaneira and Ternate and Ambon, and started to establish there. And the Portuguese were expanding. So Tom Perez, he wrote detailed accounts of many, many places in Asia. He also wrote on Bengal, but he never been to Bengal. He wrote some very strange thing. For example, he said the Bengalis are great merchants. I mean, obviously this is English translation. I don't know how good this translation is, but it does give some very strange kind of impression of his thought process. He said the Bengalis are great merchants. They're very independent, brought up to trade. They're domestic. All the merchants are false. I don't know what that means. Then I just want to give another quotation from Tom Perez. He said that a large number of Parsis, Rumis, Turks, and Arabs and merchants from Chaul, Dabol, and Goa live in Bengal. The land is very productive of many foodstuffs, meat, fish, wheat, and all cheap. The king is a Moor, a warrior. He has great renown among the Moor. The people who govern the kingdom are Abyssinian. Obviously, in around 1510 or 1515, 1512, there were no Abyssinian rulers, right? Yeah? But how he could say that they govern, Bengal, the kingdom of Bengal, very strange. But then he said these are looked upon as knights. They're greatly esteemed. They wait on the kings in their apartment. The chief among them are eunuchs, and these come to be kings and great lords in the kingdom. Those who are not eunuchs are fighting men. After the king, it is these people that the kingdom is obedient from fear. Now, was he talking about an earlier period? Before the Abyssinians were kind of defeated, the last Abyssinian ruler, or where Abyssinians still, had powerful positions, with the Sultanate. I mean, obviously, he would have heard stories, about Bengal from visitors from Bengal and business people, who and sailors and captain of ships who was taking their ships to Bengal, and so on. He didn't go himself, but it would be very strange for him to say that the Abyssinians kind of are kingmakers, or they have so much power, they control the kingdom, if Abyssinians were completely kind of removed from Bengal. I just want to say, I'm going to read this, right? So just to make it quick. It's about slave sultans. I just want to have a discussion about slave sultans in order to make sense, of the Abyssinian rule and who were these people. Muslim rule began in northern India from the late 12th century with the invasion of Muizuddin Muhammad Ghori, a Turk. By the early 13th century, the Delhi Sultanate was established by Qutubuddin Aibak after the death of his master, Muizuddin Ghori, in 1206. Qutubuddin Aibak was a slave of Muizuddin Muhammad Ghori. Qutubuddin Aibak was appointed as the governor who ruled the conquered territories on behalf of his master. After the death of Muizuddin Muhammad Ghori in 1206, Qutubuddin Aibak became the ruler. This was after a brief power struggle and on receiving official notification of manumission that he was a free man. He was not a slave. He had to prove, to the nobles and other important people that he was a free man, that his master, Muhammad Ghori, actually freed him. So he had document to prove. And when he did, he was accepted as the Sultan. But when he died, another freed Sultan of Muizuddin Muhammad Ghori, Shamsuddin Iltutmish, came to power after a short power struggle. Now, he also received manumission, right? And he was communicated to Iltutmish by Aibak from Ghori, even before Aibak received his manumission. From the time of Muizuddin Muhammad Ghori's conquest of northern India and until the death of Sultan Balban in 1287, that period of Delhi Sultanate has been described as the rule of slave sultans or Mamluks. During that period, slaves were rulers, army commanders, troops, and state officials, and held other high positions. From early on in the Delhi Sultanate, Habshi slaves were also a part of the machinery. Their influence was extremely limited at that time, except when Sultan Jalaluddin Razia became the ruler, the first female sultan, in 1236. A particular Habshi called Jamaluddin Yaqut, described as a slave Amir, acquired high levels of influence in the state machinery and became a close advisor and protector of Sultan Jalaluddin Razia. This situation did not go well with the Turkish-dominated power structure of the time. They opposed the Oman Sultan and the influence that an Abyssinian slave was having on the Sultan. Now, most of the slaves serving in the Delhi Sultanate were from a Turkish ethnic background. They mostly consisted of military slaves brought from their ancestral homes in Central Asian steppes to India to serve the rulers of the Delhi Sultanate. Most of the earliest rulers of Bengal Sultanate were slave governors appointed by Delhi Sultans, except for a brief Khalji period that followed Bakhtiar Khalji's initial conquest of Bengal, when several free ethnic Turks became rulers. From the late 13th century to the short-lived Habshi rule of Bengal, there were no other slave rulers of Bengal. The Habshi rulers of Bengal could not have been slaves when they ruled, although when they first came to India, they were slaves. How was it possible for some of the slaves that were purchased in faraway places and brought to India to become rulers? The second slave ruler of Delhi Sultanate, Shamsuddin Iltutmish, was said to have been questioned by Islamic jurists when he took over power about his slave status, as slave could not become a ruler. Sultan Shamsuddin Iltutmish produced documents to prove his manumission granted freedom by his master, Muizuddin Muhammad Gori, through his slave Kutubuddin Aibak. Both in Delhi and Deccan Sultanate, slaves played many roles in the state machinery. One of the main functions of the slave were to serve in the military. Many of them subsequently became important army commanders. Some slave commanders were said to have received many missions when their masters died, while others became free individuals when they were released from bondage by their masters. When a master died, his slave did not have an automatic right to become manumitted. An offspring of a master possessed hereditary rights to inherit the properties of the deceased, which included slaves owned by the master. The materials that I have studied so far, I have not made things crystal clear in my mind about manumission. There were likely many different outcomes in legal terms concerning how slaves could achieve manumission under different situations. Perhaps there were creative context-based rulings, including in some cases powerful slave army commanders or rulers might have disregarded prevailing views about manumission and just acted independently. Regardless of how slavery operated in various sultanates in India, there were many possible ways that slaves could become free. What roles did they play after their manumission and becoming free men? Many Abyssinian slaves in the Deccan, where they were most in demand, became powerful army commanders. Some of the ex-slaves who became free individuals through manumission continued to serve the rulers as free commanders with the forces under their control, who were mostly slave soldiers. According to Farishta, 8,000 Habshis were brought to Bengal by Sultan Rukunuddin Barbosa, but he does not classify them under categories, for example, what proportion of free commanders and slave commanders and the respective forces under them, the number of eunuchs and so on. Farishta and the Riyas provide confusing information about the slave status of the four individuals with Habshi background that became rulers of the Bengal Sultanate. Presumably, they were all free men and achieved their manumission previously through any of the possible paths mentioned above. There is also a possibility that some of them were not slaves that directly originated from Abyssinia, but could have been born in India from Indian mothers and freed Abyssinian soldiers, slaves. There is nothing in relevant historical material that can show a clear light on this. Unless new information come to light, there's not much value in further speculation on this issue. Sultan Shahzada Barbaksha, the first Abyssinian ruler who ruled for about 6 months, must have had some powerful supporters in the Sultanate, at least at the beginning. Otherwise, he would not have lasted even the short time that he did. He was described as a eunuch, but his slave status was not discussed in any of the main sources, as he seems to have been accepted as a legally legitimate sultan for a while. And the fact that no objections linked him to a possible slave status has been documented in historical record, it means that he was most likely a free man. Otherwise, it is difficult to say how he was treated as a legally legitimate ruler. Many opposed him on other grounds, for killing and being cruel and so on. The next Abyssinian ruler, Malik Andil, who became Sultan Saifuddin Firoz Shah, has been described as a premier nobleman by the Riyadh. There is no discussion about his previous or current slave state by Farishta or the Riyadh. Sultan Kutubuddin Mahmud was either the son of Sultan Jalaluddin Fateh Shah or Sultan Firoz Shah. His slave status is not discussed in any of the historical documents. However, Habash Khan, who was entrusted to look after the child Sultan, who became the administrative general of financial and administrative affairs, was described as a slave by Farishta and the Riyadh. Sidi Badr Diwana, who became the last Sultan, Habshi Sultan, Sultan Muzaffar Shah, after murdering Sultan Kutubuddin Mahmud Shah, has been described as a slave by Farishta, but not by the Riyadh. As these four individuals were all sultans for various lengths of time, with support from some wider sections of society, rather than just Abyssinian, they were all likely to have been free men when they assumed power. Based on my current understanding of the slave system in different sultanates and time periods, it is most likely that all the four rulers were free men when they became rulers. But how and when they gained their manumission is not possible to tell. And without manumission, it would have been impossible for any of them to become legitimate legal sultans, theoretically speaking, as they would have faced a lot of legal barriers. I'm nearly finished. This is the last one. Here is the last one. There's some issue that I want to kind of discuss. I'll read this because of the time issue, right? Bengal at that time was a Hindu majority land, with its divisions, subdivisions, and power structures. Muslims were the ruling class, mostly immigrants, rulers and their families, landlords, governors, religious leaders, and so on. The Hindus were organized under a caste structure and included landlords and rajas with powerful forces under their control. They also participated in Sultanate government structures in various capacities, including holding high positions. The Hindu landlords and rajas provided or deployed armed personnel to support or oppose existing rulers in their struggles against their rivals, depending on the situation. Ordinary people from different walks of life belong to both Hindu and Muslim communities. Now, in an article called Scribal Elites in Sultanate and Mughal Bengal, Kumkum Chatterjee, the author, describes some of the roles played by high caste Hindus in the Sultanate and Mughal Bengal. I want to point out just one which is relevant to this talk. He says that Sultan Alauddin Shah, which followed the short Habshi rule, there was somebody in his Sultanate, was somebody called Gopinath Basu, who was given the title of Purandar Khan, worked his way through the system when he was entrusted with the affairs of the treasury, who then became a naval commander and eventually rose to become the Sultan Chief Minister. In another book called The Bengal Sultanate, Politics, Economy, and Coin by Said Ejaz Hussain, he provides a lot of details, of Hindus serving in various under various sultans. One of them, which was the dynasty just before the Habshi, he says that Narayan Bosu was the personal physician of Rukunuddin Barbosa. His son, Mukundu Das, was the chief physician of Hussain Shah, whose chief secretary was a Brahmin named Sitwan Goswami. At one time, Sultan Rukunuddin Barbosa's treasurer was Ganda Bai Rai. There are many other examples, right? The sources that we know of and study on the topic do not provide the necessary levels of contextual information on the Habshi rule of Bengal, including the roles played by the Hindus. This makes it infinitely difficult to achieve a good understanding of the dynamics of the evolving situation and how and why things unfolded the way they did. As we do not know the specifics and the roles played by the myriads of power structures, personalities in Bengal that resulted in the outcome that we read about, This means that the efforts we make to understand and explain the Habshi period of Bengal will only provide us with a very limited partial window into the world. I'm finished. Sorry I took longer than I originally hoped to, but I hope we can have a discussion now.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you for that, Ahmedullah Bhai. Just to say to everybody, please do pop a question into the chat. Otherwise, if you want to speak, just switch on your camera and say, ask your question. I mean, in a short time, there was a lot of deaths. That's the one thing that I did kind of pick out from there. In terms of getting the information, and I mean, it sounded like lots of the texts that you studied came afterwards. How conflicting were they?
Yeah.
Well, the two main sources, where we discuss details about, what happened, how the Sultan, one Sultan was deposed and another Sultan, was installed. There are only two sources, Firishta and Riaz, Firishta's book and the Riaz. And they're almost similar, right? But there are sometimes some difference, and some of the differences are quite important as well. But they are very similar. So it shows that they've actually used some materials that previously existed, both of them accessed or used, that are no longer available.
Okay, we've got a question from Awet. He said thank you. They said thank you for the fascinating talk. There's two questions. So the first question is, in the excavations you mentioned, are you aware of material findings other than coins, e.g. pottery, ivory of African origin? Also in relation with that, I was wondering if there are any toponyms in the area indicating of Habshi habitation. That's part one of the question.
Well, the first one about excavation. What I remember, I went through some research materials, right, that various organizations have carried out in India. If I remember correctly, a lot of the stuffs were Chinese, porcelain and other items. I don't remember, to be honest with you, the details of what they found. But there are lots of potteries and jewelries and things like that.
There was.
Yeah, but I don't remember what they were. But I remember a lot of Chinese material. I can share, some of those. I still got some of the reports, some of the writings on the excavations. I can share to the colleague if he wants.
Please, if you can, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Awet, do you want to read out the second part of your question?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Hello. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi. The second one was if there was any sort of correspondence, so any communication with Abyssinia, so with actual Abyssinia, medieval time, Solomonite period, of these Habshi rulers of Bengal, like the ones that we know that existed with Latin Europe, for example.
From my reading, right, there was no mention of any communication, correspondence between some of the, Abyssinian who rule Bengal and Ethiopia or Africa. The impression I got is that it was a fast-moving situation. The country was quite unstable, right? And they, it wasn't like a Habshi rule against the others or Habshi trying to rule, right? Because the Habshi rulers, most of their troops under their support, who were supporting them, were locals, right? They were not Habshi, and then they were being opposed by another Habshi commander, and he also had Habshi and non-Habshi. you know, one of the accounts says during the last kind of Habshi rule, when he had about 85,000 Habshi soldiers and about 30,000 Afghans and Bengalis on his side. So it was a fast moving. I mean, you know, I wouldn't rule out, you know, the Habshi rulers, right? Trying to, you know, corresponding, you know, writing letters to various places. But the material that I have looked at so far, you know, there's nothing there, right? But also I think historians have kind of neglected, and they also tried to, I mean, they've been very sort of very negative, you know, right, about this Habshi period, right? Yeah? There must be some element of racism as well, right? You know, and even, you know, some of the important historians that Bengal, you know, the history books, right, yeah, written in the 50s and 40s, 50s, and one written in the 80s, I think, right, yeah. And they also, I mean, they apply, you know, words against the Habshis, right, yeah, for being how they describe the rule in a way that they don't do it to other rulers when they were even more violent and more killing families and, you know, one after another, right? So there is something there. I think it's really, if we put our mind into it, I'm sure we can develop a much better understanding, because I don't think people paid much attention yet, you know.
Shannon, you've got, thanks so much. We've got Shannon's hands up. Please, everybody, do put comments. Any feedback is always good for Ahmedullah, so please do write something in the chat if you don't want to ask it, or if you don't want to read it, say something, anything, I can read it out. So it's always good for us to get feedback on how to improve and how, if there's anything that needs clarification. Shannon, over to you.
I was just wondering, like, you know, with the rapid turnover and you know, you're saying how they had support mostly from the armies. Could you possibly, could it be that this wasn't so much about political rule, but more looking like military coups? Do you know what I mean? Because these guys were generals, and they were you know, head of the guards, and so it wasn't so much like, right, I'm a soldier and then I'm going to sit on the throne and I'm going to put my feet up. It's more like that kind of leadership. Do you know what I mean? Maybe we need to re-look at the notion of what it means to be a sultan at that time. I don't know. It came across more as a military coup to me.
I think we're probably using modern concept of coup, you know, to because if you look at that's how people establish dynasties, you know, and powers.
I know, exactly. It's like the Ottomans; they keep their brothers.
Yeah. So this was what happened. If you look throughout, right, yeah, there was so much killings, you know, of masters and families and brothers and so on.
And it was more about who is stronger to justify their leadership, rather than. I mean, it seems to me like, anyway, if I take a step back, then rather than, okay, it's passed down from family to family type of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Well, you know, the first Ethiopian ruler, he couldn't have established a dynasty because he was a eunuch. So he wouldn't have children.
Yeah.
Unless he had children before, then he became eunuch later, right? So his grab for power was, what I would say, it's pure speculation. You know, people want power because they enjoy, you know, what it gives them for a while. But then he must have been encouraged, you know, by some people in the court, because he was, I think he became the commander of the, you know, the pike guards, you know, that was guarding the palace. You know, his own power and the comfort that he would get, but plus also he was encouraged by others, because I don't think he could have moved if there were not other powerful people encouraging him and supporting him. I don't think it was just a hit of the moment that one day, you know, and just killed him. You know, there must have been, I don't know, but so that's the, and also, you know, those days you had a lot of these young men who were dreaming of establishing their own empires, you know, and dynasties. So sometimes you see, mindless wars, right? You think, why did they do this, right? They could have lived a longer life, if they didn't do this. But then those who established themselves by killing others, they succeeded. But the people who didn't succeed, we say, oh, they were stupid to try, right? And then they got knocked off early, right? But it's you don't know who's going to succeed, isn't it?
Exactly.
Stronger and at the end,
And it's not only getting onto the throne; it's actually ruling. And sometimes, it's not that. It's not. Do you know what I mean? It's not that easy. If you're a warrior, if you're a soldier or whatever, it's a completely different kind of thing to rule an empire.
The other thing what I've noticed is that this happened also throughout, Delhi Sultanate. The prime minister, the most close and the most powerful person to the Sultan, actually plots, the Sultan's downfall. So if you look at the last Ethiopian ruler, his own prime minister plotted, killed him, and then he established his own dynasty, which lasted for about 45 years.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Don't trust the prime ministers.
Thank you. We've got a couple of comments that was typed in earlier whilst you were doing the presentation. So we had a comment from Naomi. The term false in this context to the text that you were talking about, alas, means that he considered the merchants to be lacking in honesty. I think that was either one of your researchers that did their piece in 1700, pardon me. And then we had Shabna say thank you, opening up knowledge for a whole period. That was, just open up awareness, pardon me. Again, Georgia is saying the same. Is there anything that you were frustrated about when you were doing this research?
It's a lack of information, because I wanted to understand. I wanted to know more people, their names, their positions, in the Sultanate, their period, and also a little bit about the society.
Do you think it's maybe perhaps, sorry to interrupt, in terms of is it trying to get rid of that, to just remove that period of history? That's why we don't have it, is we don't want to acknowledge that, an Abyssinian ruled us, so to speak. Could that be?
I don't, to be honest, I don't really know. But what I think is that the other thing I think what it is, the Abyssinians, they were brought to India, as slaves from Ethiopia. Many of them didn't come directly, they went to Arabia, Baghdad and other places. Then they were resold, and they brought to India. I don't have enough full details, but and also the four Abyssinian rulers that we were talking about, three who are adults. We don't have any knowledge about their kind of background, where they came from, how they came, whether they came by land, from the Deccans, or Gujarat, or they came by sea. We don't know anything about that. But the one of the most famous Indian Abyssinian, Ambar Malik, right? He fought Jahangir, he prevented Jahangir from conquering a particular place. I forgot the name. Historians have traced, his life, back to the particular regions in Ethiopia where he came from. So, if you get people taking an interest, I'm sure, we will be able to find a lot more things.
Hold on a moment. We've got a question from Hannah. I have a bit more of a general question on the topic of Habshi and Siddhas in South Asia. I am wondering whether there has been much archaeological work done on their communities, for example, in the Deccan, as well as the much later Siddhi community at Janjira?
Well, because I think because in Jinjira, in the other parts of India, you still have an active African Indian community going back to that period, and so on. But in Bengal, because it was only for 7 years, and then we don't hear anything about them. And then there were so much other rules, there was Hussain Shahi, the Afghans, the Mughals, and also the palace, the Gore. Most of the things disappeared. It was a large city, about 19 miles long, according to one account. Except few mosques, few religious places, all the other buildings were stripped. But archaeologists have been digging up, and they have found many interesting things. I'm not very familiar. I had a quick look, at some of those writings, but I'm going to spend some more time, going more into the detail. And also, when the pandemic ends and India is safe, then I will go and visit city of Gore, where and between the Bengal Sultanate, the other city nearby, Pandua, was also capital for quite a long time. So between Pandua and Gore, part of Gore is in Russia, in Bangladesh, there are some archaeological work going on, probably not enough.
Thank you. Given that we're not getting not a lot of chat or questions, I guess I think the last question I would ask you is, where can we get more information?
What I hope to do is, obviously I've written a piece in my blog, and I hope people take an interest to study this period, and obviously I'm going to try and get more information, especially when the pandemic ends, because I'm still at very initial stage of this kind of research. This is like my first kind of attempt.
Well, Beharo's just put in chat Kenneth Robbins and John MacLeod's book Habshi Amrat deals with Habshi rulers, so there could be a nice segue into that as well. So I'd just like to thank you so much for today's talk. It's absolutely been riveting. There's been things that I just didn't know. So for me, definitely an eye-opener. Janan, over to you.
Thank you, Ahmedullah. Yeah, everyone's saying thank you for the talk. It's very interesting. It's an interesting, very short, when you look at the hundreds of years period of time. And I think you've got your work cut out for you, considering, when you do research. I know how hard it can be sometimes when you can't, you're writing about something that hasn't really been written about much at all. So maybe that's a good thing as well, because then you're producing some new knowledge. But is there anything you want to kind of end on?
The last thing, if you look at the Bengali-speaking people, both Hindus and Muslim, you will see that there's a real big mix. You get all kinds of skin complexion, hair type. So you can see there's been a great kind of melting pot. But by studying history like this, you can actually get more intuitive sense, of why, we look like this, or sometimes some things are hidden in people deep inside, like emotional feelings and other things. They come from lots of mixing of genes and things like that. This is what I believe, from different sources. So even, to be honest with you, before end of last year, I didn't know hardly anything about Bengal and Bengal history, like before the British, before the Mughals, right? But I think now we must focus on earlier period. Without that, we won't understand hardly anything about ourselves. The other thing I want to say, like if you look at some people might think the Muslim population of Bengal had more mixes from the Muslim community, because the Turks, the Afghans, they came, and the Abyssinians who came, although originally they were not Muslim, but in the process they became Muslim, right? But if you look at the Hindus and Muslims of Bengal, they look similar. There's no, if there were more Muslim in, the Turkic and foreign blood into the Muslim, then Bengali Muslim would look slightly different, but they don't. So it means, right, if this is true, right, it means that both the Hindu Bengalis and the Muslim Bengalis had the similar mixes, right? So some of the, and also, all those Turkish, thousands and thousands of Turkish and Afghan men who came to fight, they didn't bring their wives. A lot of them died before they got married, right? So they married locals, right? Yeah? So some of the people that they married, they might have reverted back to Hinduism, right? And some of them remain Muslim, because otherwise you cannot explain, I mean, this is from superficial, my feeling, but I haven't done any proper studies. But I think, studying more older history is really important if you want to understand about, the present, the feelings and emotions and the makeup.
And Shihan wants to know, are you planning on publishing your work?
Well, this particular one, I've published this, in my blog, but later on, I'm doing more work, and God willing, I hope to publish something when I've done more work, and also a few other topics, I'm working on.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ahmedullah, and thank you all for joining us on this fascinating slice of history.